The dust hadn't been touched in 40 years. Margaret Calloway had told herself she was ready. She had the trash bags, the rubber gloves, the strong coffee going cold on the landing below. What she wasn't ready for was the smell, that particular combination of cedar, old paper, and something else she couldn't name. Something that felt almost alive. She had inherited the house 3 weeks after her mother passed. A quiet farmhouse on the edge of Millhaven, a small town in rural Ohio where nothing interesting ever happened and everyone knew the name of your grandmother. Margaret hadn't visited in 6 years. Life in Chicago had a way of swallowing time whole, and now she stood at the top of the pull-down attic stairs, 41 years old, recently divorced, and completely alone, wondering why her mother had padlocked this door. The padlock had taken her 20 minutes and a bolt cutter borrowed from the neighbor, old Gerald, who'd handed it over without a single question. He'd just looked at her with something strange in his eyes. Not pity. Something closer to relief. She pushed the attic door open. Sunlight cut through a single cracked window at the far end, painting a long golden stripe across boxes and sheet-covered furniture and decades of accumulated silence. Margaret stepped inside, her footsteps creaking against the old floorboards. Dust rose around her ankles like tiny ghosts disturbed from sleep. She started with the nearest boxes. Christmas ornaments. Her father's old fishing magazines. A broken clock that had stopped at 3:47 and never been repaired. She worked steadily, methodically, the way she did everything since the divorce, focused, efficient, feelings kept carefully at arm's length. But nobody expected what happened next. She was reaching for a cardboard box near the back wall, half hidden behind an old rocking chair draped in a yellowed sheet, when she heard it. A sound. Small. Quiet. Almost nothing. But in that deep, dusty silence, it hit her like a thunderclap. She froze. It came again, a soft rustling, like the turning of a page, or an animal shifting in sleep. Margaret stood completely still, heart hammering against her ribs, every rational thought dissolving. She told herself it was a squirrel. A bird that had gotten in through the cracked window. Something ordinary. Something explainable. She pulled back the rocking chair. Behind it was a small wooden door she had never once seen, in all her childhood years in this house. No more than 3 feet tall, set directly into the slanted attic wall. Old brass hinges. A simple latch, unlocked. The rustling came again from behind it. Margaret's hand was shaking when she reached for the latch. The little door swung open with a long, tired groan. Inside was a small space, a hidden room, barely bigger than a closet, carved into the eave of the house. There was a thin mattress on the floor with a faded patchwork quilt. A small wooden crate being used as a table. A cup with a spoon still sitting in it. A stack of picture books, worn soft at the corners. And a battery-powered lantern, its light faint but still glowing. And sitting cross-legged on the mattress, clutching a stuffed rabbit missing one eye, was a child. A little girl. She looked to be about 7 or 8 years old, with wide brown eyes and dark tangled hair, and a smear of what appeared to be peanut butter on her left cheek. She was wearing a yellow sweater 2 sizes too big, and small white socks with a hole in the left toe. She was watching Margaret with an expression of absolute calm that somehow made the whole thing more terrifying, not less. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Then the little girl tilted her head slightly and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Are you the one she sent?" Margaret's coffee was still going cold on the landing below. The bolt cutter was still leaning against the attic doorframe. The morning birds outside were still singing their ordinary songs. But nothing about this moment was ordinary. Nothing about this would ever be ordinary again. "Who are you?" Margaret finally whispered. The little girl looked down at her one-eyed rabbit. She smoothed its ear with one small finger, the way a child does when they are choosing very carefully what to say next. Then she looked back up. "My name is Rose," she said quietly. "And your mother told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should wait. She said someone would come." She paused, her small brow furrowing. She said I would know them by their eyes. Margaret couldn't speak. Margaret couldn't speak. Because the little girl was staring at her with the kind of certainty that only children carry, the terrifying, unshakable certainty of someone who has been told something true. The truth had been hidden for years. And somewhere in the walls of this old farmhouse, in the layers of dust and locked doors and unanswered questions, Margaret Calloway's entire understanding of her mother, her family, and herself had just cracked open like old wood in winter. She had come to clean out an attic. She had found something her mother had kept secret for a very long time. And whatever came next, she already knew, was going to change everything. Margaret didn't call the police. She would ask herself later, many times, why that was her first instinct. Maybe it was the way Rose sat so still, so unbothered, like a child who had learned very early that stillness was the safest thing she could offer the world. Maybe it was something in those brown eyes, something familiar that Margaret couldn't name yet but felt in the deepest part of her chest, the way you feel a song you haven't heard since childhood. Or maybe it was simply that Rose had mentioned her mother's eyes. She helped the little girl out of the hidden room slowly, carefully, the way you'd help someone cross a frozen lake. Rose moved without complaint, ducking through the small door with practiced ease, the stuffed rabbit tucked firmly under one arm. When she stood upright in the main attic, blinking in the stronger light, Margaret noticed things she hadn't seen in the dimness of that tiny space. Rose was thin. Not alarmingly so, but the kind of thin that comes from months of careful rationing rather than proper meals. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. And on her left wrist, nearly hidden by the oversized sleeve of that yellow sweater, was a small birthmark, dark, oval-shaped, about the size of a thumbprint. Margaret's breath caught. She had the same birthmark. Same wrist. Same shape. Same exact shade. She pulled her own sleeve down quickly, her mind suddenly loud with a noise that wasn't quite thought, and wasn't quite feeling, but was something electric and terrifying in between. She said nothing. She simply led Rose down the attic stairs, one careful step at a time, into the warmth of the house below. But nobody expected what happened next. Rose walked into the kitchen like she had been there before. Not hesitantly, the way a stranger moves through an unfamiliar space, testing, pausing, looking for cues. She walked in with the quiet confidence of someone returning somewhere known. She went directly to the third cabinet from the left, opened it without searching, and pulled out a yellow mug with a small chip on the handle. Margaret's mother's favorite mug. The one she'd used every single morning for 20 years. She always made me cocoa in this one, Rose said simply, setting it on the counter and looking at Margaret with those steady brown eyes. Can I have some? Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, gripping the frame without realizing it. The morning light was coming through the window above the sink, falling across the worn linoleum floor in soft squares. A cardinal landed on the bird feeder outside, pecked twice, and flew away. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Nothing was as it had always been. She made the cocoa. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret had eaten 10,000 childhood breakfasts, and Margaret watched Rose wrap both small hands around the warm mug and blow carefully across the surface before each sip. Patient. Precise. An old habit in a young child. How long have you been here, Rose? Margaret asked, keeping her voice as gentle as she could manage. Since October, Rose said. It was now the second week of March. Margaret closed her eyes for just a moment. 5 months. This child had been living in the attic of her mother's house for 5 months. Through the first frost. Through Christmas. Through the coldest January Millhaven had seen in 30 years. Her mother had been alive for most of that time, moving through the house below, cooking meals, watching evening television, calling Margaret every Sunday, never once saying a word. The truth had been hidden for years. But the hiding had been deliberate. Careful. Loving. Did my mother, Margaret stopped. Started again. Did Eleanor take care of you up there? Rose nodded, both hands still around the mug. She came every morning and every night. She brought food and books and the lantern. She taught me to play cards. A small pause. She cried sometimes when she thought I was asleep. But I never told her I heard. Margaret felt something break open quietly inside her chest. Rose. She leaned forward slightly. I need to ask you something important, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that? The little girl nodded seriously. Where did you come from? Before here. Before the attic. Who brought you to this house? Rose was quiet for a long moment. She set down her mug. She straightened the ear of her one-eyed rabbit with that same careful finger. Outside, the wind moved through the old oak tree in the yard, and the branches tapped lightly against the kitchen window like someone asking to come in. Then Rose looked up. My mother brought me, she said. She said Eleanor would keep me safe until she came back. Something shifted in the child's expression, not sadness exactly, but the particular kind of stillness that lives just on the other side of it. She hasn't come back yet. Who is your mother? Margaret whispered. Rose reached into the front pocket of her too big yellow sweater, and withdrew a small, folded photograph. It was worn at the creases, soft from handling, the way a photograph gets when it has been held and re-held and held again in the dark. She placed it carefully on the kitchen table and slid it across to Margaret without a word. Margaret picked it up. And the room tilted. The woman in the photograph was young, mid-20s, laughing, caught in a moment of pure unguarded joy on what appeared to be a summer day. Dark hair. Brown eyes. A yellow sweater. And on her left wrist, caught at the edge of the frame, a small dark birthmark the size and shape of a thumbprint. But that wasn't what made the room tilt. What made the room tilt was that Margaret recognized the background. The old oak tree. The bird feeder. The kitchen window. The photograph had been taken in this backyard. And the woman in it, the woman who was apparently Rose's mother, was someone Margaret had never once seen in her entire life. But she shared Margaret's face. What she discovered changed everything. Somewhere in this house, buried beneath 40 years of silence and locked doors and Sunday phone calls that never went quite deep enough, was a secret her mother had carried alone. A secret with brown eyes and a yellow sweater, and a one-eyed rabbit. A secret that was now sitting at the kitchen table, finishing the last of its cocoa, waiting with the patience of a child who had learned that the truth, like the people we love, eventually finds its way home. Margaret turned the photograph over with trembling hands. On the back, in her mother's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. 4 words that were somehow both an answer and the beginning of every question Margaret had never known to ask. She read them once. Then again. Then she looked up at Rose. The 4 words were simple. They were the kind of words that, in any other context, on any other afternoon, would have meant nothing at all. But sitting at that kitchen table, holding a photograph of a woman who wore her own face like a mirror, they landed with the quiet devastation of something that had always been true, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to be known. She is yours too. Margaret set the photograph down very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid of dropping. The kitchen was absolutely silent except for the wind against the old oak and the small sound of Rose placing her empty mug back on the table with both hands, the way Eleanor had probably taught her. Gently. Always gently. Rose. Margaret's voice came out smaller than she intended. Did your mother ever tell you her name? Her full name? Rose thought about this with the seriousness that children reserve for questions they understand are important. Clara, she said. Clara Calloway. The name hit Margaret like cold water. Calloway. Her name. Her mother's name. The name on the mailbox at the end of the gravel driveway, the name on the deed to this house, the name Margaret had carried through a Chicago marriage and brought back with her in the divorce because it was the one thing that had always felt entirely and completely hers. She stood up from the table without quite deciding to. She walked to the window and stood there with her arms crossed over her chest, looking out at the backyard, at the old oak tree, at the bird feeder where the cardinal had landed and left. The morning had grown brighter while they sat inside. The frost on the grass had melted into a soft gleam, and the world outside looked the way it always did in early March in Ohio, tentative, unsure of itself. Something between ending and beginning. She had a sister. She had a sister she had never known existed. And that sister had a daughter. And that daughter had been living in the attic of their mother's house for 5 months while Margaret lived her careful, contracted, Chicago life completely unaware that any of this was real. The truth had been hidden for years. And it had been hidden not out of cruelty, but out of the particular kind of love that makes impossible decisions in impossible moments, and then carries the weight of them silently, alone, until the body finally gives out and the secrets are left behind like furniture, solid, undeniable, waiting to be dealt with by whoever comes next. She turned back to Rose. "Do you know where your mother is?" Rose looked at her rabbit. "She got sick," she said quietly. "Last autumn. She brought me here first, before she went to the hospital. She said Grandma Eleanor would keep me safe." A breath. "She said she would come back when she was better." Margaret sat back down. She reached across the table slowly, giving Rose every chance to pull away, and covered the little girl's small hand with her own. Rose looked down at their hands together and then up at Margaret's face, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in the way of movies and grand revelations, but in the small, exhausted way of a child who has been holding something heavy for a very long time, and has just been offered permission to set it down. "I'm going to find her," Margaret said. And she meant it with every part of herself. "I promise you, Rose. We are going to find your mother." Then something impossible happened. Margaret's phone rang. An unknown number. Ohio area code, but not Millhaven. She almost let it go to voicemail. Later she would think about that, how close she came to pressing decline, how differently everything might have unfolded. But something made her answer. Something quiet and certain, the same instinct that had kept her from calling the police that morning, the same instinct that had made her reach for that little brass latch without fully knowing why. "Hello." A pause. Then a voice, thin, careful, carrying the particular fragility of someone who has recently relearned how to speak. "Is this Margaret?" Everything in the kitchen went still. "Yes," Margaret whispered. "This is Margaret." Another pause. Longer this time. And then, with the sound of someone who has been rehearsing this moment for months, and is now discovering that no rehearsal was ever going to be enough, "My name is Clara. I'm calling from Mercy General in Columbus." A breath. "I think you found my daughter." Margaret closed her eyes. In the 5 seconds of silence that followed, she felt 41 years rearrange themselves. Every memory of her mother took on new texture, every careful subject change, every photograph album that somehow only started in 1987, every Christmas where Eleanor got quiet in the evenings and stared at something no one else could see. The locked attic. The padlock that had taken 20 minutes, and a borrowed bolt cutter to open. The neighbor Gerald and his eyes that looked like relief. All of it had been holding this moment. All of it had been pointing here. "Yes," Margaret said finally, opening her eyes and looking at Rose, who was watching her with those wide, steady brown eyes that were the same shape as her own, the same shade as the woman in the photograph, the same darkness as the birthmark on both their wrists. "I found her. She's safe. She's right here with me." She heard Clara exhale on the other end of the line, a sound so raw and unguarded that it bypassed every careful defense Margaret had built around herself, and went straight to the center of her chest like a key finding a lock it was always meant for. "I'm getting better," Clara said. "The doctors say another few weeks." "I didn't know who else, Mom was the only one who knew, and when she passed I didn't know if anyone would find her voice broke. She steadied it. "I didn't know if Rose would be okay." "She's okay," Margaret said softly. Clara, the name felt strange and right simultaneously, the way all true things do when you first say them aloud. "She's been so brave. She's been waiting for you." Across the table, Rose had gone very still. Her eyes were wide and fixed on Margaret's face, reading it the way children read adult faces when they know something important is being decided. Margaret kept her gaze steady and warm and certain. She mouthed 2 words. "Your mom." And Rose, this small, patient, extraordinary child who had spent 5 months in an attic keeping herself calm with picture books and peanut butter, and a one-eyed rabbit, who had blown carefully across her cocoa before every sip and smoothed her rabbit's ear when choosing her words and held her mother's photograph until the creases went soft, Rose made a sound that was nothing like the composed stillness she had shown all morning. It was the sound of a child who had held on long enough to finally let go. Margaret kept the phone to her ear and reached across the table and gathered Rose into her arms, and the little girl pressed her face against Margaret's shoulder and wept with the whole relieved weight of everything she had been carrying. Outside, the March sun broke through the last of the morning clouds and poured through the kitchen window in a long, warm flood across the linoleum floor, and the yellow mug, and the worn photograph, and the 2 women's hands that had held it. 6 weeks later, Clara Calloway walked out of Mercy General on a Tuesday morning in April. Margaret was in the parking lot. Rose was beside her, holding her one-eyed rabbit in one arm and Margaret's hand in the other, standing on her tiptoes, searching. When she saw her mother come through the sliding glass doors, she didn't run, she flew, in the way children move when the body outruns every other consideration, pure and immediate and unstoppable as gravity. Clara caught her. Margaret stood a few feet away and watched her sister hold her daughter, and she thought about her mother. She thought about Eleanor Calloway carrying an impossible secret through 40 years of ordinary mornings, keeping a child safe in a hidden room through an Ohio winter, trusting that the locked door, and the padlock, and the neighbor with the bolt cutter, and the photograph with 4 words on the back would eventually add up to this parking lot, this April morning, this reunion that she had engineered from beyond her own life. She had not been a perfect woman. She had made choices that left damage in their wake. But she had also, in her quiet and complicated way, held everything together long enough for it to find its own shape. Clara looked up over Rose's head and found Margaret's eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara smiled, the same smile from the photograph, unguarded and bright, and so familiar that Margaret felt it in her own face before she realized she was smiling back. They had 1,000 conversations ahead of them. Hard ones and tender ones, and ones that would take years to fully finish. There was grief to move through and history to piece together and a family to rebuild from the truth up, which is always slower and more complicated than the stories make it sound. But that morning, in an April parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, it was enough to simply stand in the sunlight together. Some families are broken apart by secrets. And some families, the lucky ones, the stubborn ones, the ones held together by a mother's love, and a child's patience, and a photograph with 4 words on the back, find their way back to each other through them. Margaret had gone to clean out an attic. She had found everything she never knew she was missing.